Great. We have 11 total students, staff, and I think we may just have 10 today, but let's wait a minute or two for people to go on. And Ross, do you want to just quickly introduce Steph to get going?
Glad to do that. Let me know when you want to hit the go button.
Yeah, well, it's your call.
Is it go time?
You could probably count better as well, or better than I can. So.
Looks like we have 4. Maybe we'll give a couple minutes. Maybe call it a quorum if we get 6. Because I think people will probably hop on it within the next couple minutes. So
yeah,
we'll give it just a minute or two.
Let me just check and make sure. Obviously, there shouldn't be any Zoom problems. Let me see if there's anything. Don't see anything via email. No.
Hey Russ, how far from here did Ev Rogers grow up?
I don't know about grow up, but it was Iowa State Ag Extension, what it means, 30 miles further there. I don't know the story about where he grew up. Maybe it was Missouri, Steph. Who knows?
No, it was an Iowa farm, I think.
Oh, was it really?
I
don't know that. So
yeah, we're gonna say we're in the breadbasket of the foundation of D&I science.
There you go.
So
excellent. And in a real science location. All right. I'll let you guys take it away. That's quite a intimidating introduction, but
yeah, the fusion theory, the origins here, especially with Iowa State. We don't really, you probably covered diffusion theory some in other courses in the certificate, right? Yeah.
I'm pretty sure most everybody's, well, I think they have to have had the intro course that Borsica does. I think it's Borsica and Tina do it now together, team teaching. Okay. So
okay, let's see, 2, 4, 6. We have 6. So how about we get started? Is that good?
Yep.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Steph Mazuka and I are joining you from Des Moines, Iowa. We're here on a training, and so we were just talking about this is where Ev Rogers and Iowa State did so much of the work first in agriculture, and then Ev Rogers working across different areas in health in the 1960s. So we're sort of in the founding place of implementation science in a way where diffusion theory was really realized. So that's kind of interesting. And so today the focus, as you know, is on designs, and delighted to have with us Steph Mazuka Reagan, who is a great colleague of ours and a great colleague of mine at WashU. Steph joined us in 2017. That good? Oh, good. I'm glad. Okay, so it's been with us about 6 years, and as you know, in your meetings, did one of the seminal reviews of designs, and so that was one that we were just talking about. At some point in the future, we're going to probably want to update. And Steph's background is in from UNC, training in epidemiology and nutrition science, and then so many of us. She worked at a prevention research center at Chapel Hill, and then we managed to recruit her to come to WashU in a postdoc and now a faculty member. Her backgrounds and skills focus in the methods area, like the designs work. She's also the co-lead of our methods unit within our ISD3, our implementation science for cancer control, and does content work in early childcare organizations to make their environments and their lives healthier, and also working in public health practice with a grant she has funded now. It was an R37 grant, an early career merit award to study academic health departments, how health departments and academic institutions can work together to deliver evidence-based practices better. So delighted to have Steph with us today. Thanks, Steph, for joining us. We're in the same room together. It's kind of a lab area, so we're gonna each try to be muted when the other one is talking, and I won't do much talking today. So hand it over to Steph and Russ.
Great. Thanks, Ross. I'll show you the one. There's a really loud fan, so tell me if it's too loud. But we have a nice like hood and warming bath thing. So we're like in the, a nice hard science lab here for our D&I chat today. So thanks for having me, and thanks to all of you for your questions. I was telling Russ and Ross, don't tell the other people who have taken this class, but these were definitely the hardest and I think most stimulating questions that I've gotten from I think this is maybe my third time doing this class. So kudos to you all. I can tell that you're really thinking about these issues. And so what I was hoping to do is to run through the questions that you all sent ahead of time. And then as you're thinking about things, we can chat through them. And if there are other questions that come up, please feel free to jump in and ask those or pop them in the chat and we can get to them as well. So I'm going to jump right in. It seems like you all have a good foundation in designs, so I don't feel like I need to kind of set up anything. So the first question that I had on my list was thinking about the use of quasi-experimental designs. Will study sections approve of them and how to present them? And I think this question is a really good one because for me, this is really about like selling your design within the context of your grant proposals. So I am less familiar with using quasi-experimental designs in my own work, but as I've seen it, and kind of my take on it was that study sections will approve of them if they're as strong as they can be, and they match your research question. So that you can get some good internal validity, and that you defend things. I think that's one of the lessons that I've learned pretty quickly in my career is that it's on you to defend and to justify every choice that you're making. And I think, when you're presenting it, thinking about why a quasi-experimental design is the design you need to answer your research question, showing reviewers that you've thought about the ins and outs of each individual study design, and you're still picking this one, and you're doing X, Y, and Z to make it as strong as you can. I think it shows reviewers that you're careful and thoughtful with your science. And that I think pays dividends in kind of increasing the chances that they'll approve or believe you that this is a good design. I think that they're really suited towards, and where I've seen them kind of pop up the most is in like the time sensitive kind of natural experiment types of grants. There are several PARs, like I know it seems like there's always a time sensitive obesity grant out, like call out there. And I think that they're also really well suited to policy implementation research, which I think could be an advantage because that's an area of research that NIH would like to see more of. So I think that could play to your favor. I think they're also, used if you're pitching a K or like an R34 or something like that, where you're thinking about smaller scale feasibility studies. So I think making sure that you're kind of aligning the scale of the study and the scope, as well as your research question, and kind of tying it all together. The other thing I was thinking about is that you kind of like only have so many hits to your approach that reviewers will allow. So like make sure that you have strong measures, you have a theoretical approach, and if you have to kind of fudge a little bit on the quasi-experimental design because you can't have like the best control group you could ever design, at least you're set up strong in the other areas to kind of compensate for the kind of like the limitation that you have there. Like if you have a limitation, you can't get around it, try not to have too many other limitations, which I think is a rosy view of the world, but I think it's good to kind of force us to think really carefully about how we're pitching our designs. Follow-ups to that, additional questions, comments that folks have? Okay. Yeah, I thought that's a great question because it's one that you get a little nervous of if you're not doing an RCT. You're like, ooh, how am I going to make people believe this is the right thing? The second question that I saw was, what do you see as the future of experimental design in D&I science? Will it be more adaptive designs, more group model building, etc.? I have a two-part answer for this. I hope part that actually answers the question, and then also an answer that I want to give, like the politician, I'm answering the question I want to answer. So I think a couple of the changes that I was thinking about was not necessarily just in like if you were to look at, oh, RCTs are used in X percent, stepped wedge in Y percent. I don't know that we'll necessarily see the changes, like big changes in those percentages, but I think we're going to see a shift to answering different questions. So especially in the more mature areas of D&I science, like I think about, some of our clinical areas that we've been working in a lot, mental health services research, I feel like those are kind of like the further along areas of D&I science compared to some of the things that I do. I don't think it's going to be as much testing implementation strategy A versus B or A versus A plus B, things like that. And that's where I think you'll see more of the adaptive designs, testing the sequence of implementation strategies, as well as scale out strategies and scale out studies that are focused on bringing some sort of implementation effort to new settings or different populations, especially as we think about health equity related research. In some of the newer areas, we still might need those kind of like basic building blocks of like, oh, this is where we need to test different strategies against each other because we don't really know what the best way to approach real world implementation. And that's okay. I think, it's kind of just a matter of like where you are in the questions that you're asking. And then I was thinking about, this was like my fun thing for, my note taking last night. Some things that I thought would be fun and should be like important to consider in the future for how designs are used. Like I said, I think policy research, I feel like everyone is talking about like at the higher levels, how important policy research is. And as someone who's like sort of interested in policy research, but sort of scared of it, I think that's a good reminder to me to kind of push myself out of my comfort zone. And that seems like a really important area. I think we'll also see a lot on de-implementation and misimplementation. So, okay, we might have these practices that are in place. Should those be the practices and programs and policies that are? And if not, how do we take those away and perhaps replace them with things that are more effective, more high value, things like that. I think sustainability is also a really key issue for us in the coming years. Initial adoption is great, but it's not sufficient for long-term changes. So I think we'll see some of these maybe like these same study designs, but looking at the scope over a longer period of time, or using some of our quasi-experimental or observational designs to get at sustainability questions. I'm not sure how much you all have talked about mechanisms in your coursework to date, but that seems to be something that's getting people really excited, and I think will be a combination of both experimental and non-experimental designs. And then I think dissemination research will, I think most of our work is really focused on implementation so far, kind of as a field. And I think as we grow the dissemination research kind of questions, those will pop up more in our D&I designs. And then I think to the end point of the question, I think we will see more of an integration of system science methods, simulation modeling, and system science principles. So thinking about like using group model building at the exploration phase. So we might see different methods and different designs being used depending on kind of where we are in the EPIS framework and things like that. Did anyone else have any things that they've come across in terms of where you see the future going, where you want to see the future going, what frustrates you about things currently?
Well, let me jump in just with one observation, Steph, and then bring it back to one other question. I don't think I sent you, but the students have had over the last couple weeks. I guess my observation is I still feel that there's kind of an almost an anti-innovation bias often about design, despite the fact that we say innovation is one of the things we're supposed to score on or whatever. Like you said, whenever I see something that's a little different, than the standard 2-arm RCT. You know, I feel like you do need to really spend a lot of time, like justifying it. I thought you had great advice there. And I don't know, I guess maybe we're all, but somewhat, I don't know if it's quote human nature or what, but things we don't understand or new, I think we tend to be innately more critical of or whatever, or ask questions. But I don't know, just a thought. Like you, I think we're going to see more adaptive designs, more things like, you know, some type of a smart designs and that sort of thing going forward. I hope we can see more things that are integrating context and things as we go on. The question, then I'll shut up here and see if others want to bring in things that the students have had, which is a great one, is several of them are interested in comparative designs, both kind of PCORI type CER designs, but also comparative implementation studies and issues. And I think if you just have any thoughts or wisdom, and maybe I can pull the students in here to have them elaborate a little bit or give us examples on
Yeah,
that.
I'm curious to hear some examples, because I think they're, you know, that's a pretty broad umbrella. And if there are specific types that folks are having, you know, kind of that are bumping up against some struggles in pitching D&I designs, I think it's probably easier to tackle more proximally to what you're doing. So for those of you who are interested, if you want to share a little bit about what you do.
If I was going to add one really quick thing about the quasi-experimental designs, I look back at Steph's great paper, and there were only 3% of the studies that were reviewed in that 2018 paper that included any version of a time series design. And if you're studying especially policy-oriented things or things where you can collect multiple time points, the time series design is a very rigorous design. And it lets you do an interrupted time series. Sometimes you even have a control where you've got a time series where a policy didn't occur. And so keep that one in mind. It's clearly in our field a design that is not being utilized to the full extent that it could be. In the policy world, time series is like the top of like the apex of the pyramid for study design. And in D&I, we don't even use it. So that's just something I wanted to know.
Yeah, I think Rakesh, to your comment, the issue of complexity and statistical considerations for some of these different designs. Yeah, like we know how to power a cluster randomized RCT or an individual level RCT. Like it's very easy to get everyone's head around. So I think for us as the researchers, we probably need to build up our bench of folks that can provide really strong methodological consultations to others who are using these designs. You know, so you have your people who can talk you through the complexity or help you think through power issues. You know, I know that we have some really great folks at WashU who have thought through the power issues related to stepped wedge designs, but I think they're pretty, you know, pretty hard to come by. So I'm hopeful that we can convince our, you know, small c conservative biostatistician friends to come along with us on some pretty crazy adventures from what they're used to. And I think also, I don't know if this is possible, but I think that it would be good to have some sort of guidance in study section documents, like to say that they value these sorts of things and they're like, it's okay to not, you know, it's okay if things aren't all RCTs. Like it's just not going to be the right design for every D&I question. So it would be, you know, it would be good for people to in positions of power to like remind us of that and nudge us towards being a little bit more open to things. So I don't know that NIH would ever do that, but it might be nice. So
Lots of issues there, Steph,
Yes.
some behind the magic screen too, but I
I
couldn't
know.
agree more. So come on, you all have been pushing Ross and me with great reflections and questions, particularly about the
Yeah.
comparative thing. Here's your chance to ask Steph explicitly. So I'm not sure why you're all so quiet this morning, but,
You could be
please
wowed by
jump
all
in.
of the technology behind us. I know.
That's right. It's all the true science instead of this
Yeah.
stuff they're intimidated by.
Well, I can go, but I was hesitant because I feel like, it's like, I want to make sure my questions are relevant for everyone. But I am working on a comparative effectiveness comparing two different maternal health interventions, doula care and group prenatal care, because they're both very time intensive. So the idea is helping people make decisions. It's also a PCORI study, so comparing it to nothing is, whatever, not ideal. So I guess it's more of a hybrid trial, but I was really struggling with this with my AIM-3, which is like the implementation, looking at the implementation outcomes, because they're different interventions. So it's like, how much do I need to match up like that comparison, or is it really like kind of two different evaluations, and like where is I guess if you have any thoughts on like how to approach when you're comparing two different things, implementation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So my first thought is that, your primary goal is to understand the effectiveness outcomes. So I think it's okay if your AIM-3 is a little bit more exploratory. Like that's kind of to be expected, because if you're implementing something different, it's probably going to be implemented differently. So I will say I wonder if you can tie them both to the same implementation theory. Like if, there's something similar that you can thread through them so that you're looking at similar types of outcomes, or, like operationalizing them a little bit differently, but the construct is the same within each of the arms. I think that would probably be a way, where you can compare, red apples to green apples. But I also think it's okay if you're pitching it as we're gathering information for future implementation. So if it's, if intervention A works better, now we're ready to go with our implementation plan, and B otherwise. So I think it kind of depends on what your specific AIM-3 question is, whether you're kind of gathering that formative data to set you up for the future, or if you really want to say something about those two approaches and interventions.
Yeah, I feel like it's maybe just, it's obviously underdeveloped, but I feel like there's something about the fact that, like, I think my hypothesis is that doula care will work better, particularly for certain groups of women. But are the barriers to implementation so much greater that like it evens out, or like, I guess like that is maybe what I'm trying to get at. And I don't know exactly what the most interesting way to do that is, I guess.
Right. So, I mean, there are measures of, implementation, acceptability and appropriateness and feasibility, like really good short measures that Brian Weider and company have developed.
Sure.
So, you could administer those and see, like compare, it's the same population of individuals theoretically. So, how do these stack up head to head from an implementation perspective? And then, do some qualitative work to understand, what's the profile of barriers? Are there more at different levels? Are they feeling stronger about those barriers? Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. It's kind of outside of the, like experimental D&I design question, but I think it's a worthwhile one.
So, Steph, just riffing off the top of my head on that, I'm wondering, to me, maybe one of the intriguing ways to maybe frame that, Sarah, might be that you might almost hypothesize different implementation outcomes for these different strategies. And that could be kind of a cool hypothesis. And then it could well be getting into Steph kind of tossed out there, but thinking about mechanisms or whatever, different mechanisms of producing a given effectiveness outcome or whatever. And to me, that kind of cues off another of, I think, the innovations that I also think study sections may be biased against, but maybe going to change in the future, something like coincidence analysis, which talks about, different combinations of factors. And one of them could be, the type of setting or the type of participant or something there. And how do you produce, what are the different pathways? And there may be, multiple pathways to that. But I don't know, Steph or Ross, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think
you off?
I'll toss one in and see if Ross has others as well. I think that would be really interesting to unpack. You will have your, like your central tendency of comparative effectiveness, but is there perhaps, are there different groups for which one is more, there's a word I'm looking for that's escaping my memory right now. I apologize. Like if there's one that's better suited towards a particular subgroup of individuals or not, and something like a configurational analysis will help you get at that kind of stuff. Ross, what do you?
I don't think I have anything to add. I think it's what I would think about, Sarah, is play out some different scenarios of the design, the implications of that design. What we sometimes like to do is think about designs that includes, power calculations and then analytic, and think every design option is going to have trade-offs. And so think about the design offs and think of those trade-offs, and then work with your teams and your other colleagues, people who can look at this from different perspectives. There's often not sort of one right answer to any of these questions like you just asked, but do the one that sort of makes sense to you. And then whenever possible, we'll have one that might add an innovation to your proposal. If something goes to the implementation science study section, they're often looking for what's the implementation science innovation of this study. And that could be a design or an analytic part of it as well. Or it could be a new way of applying a method that somehow informs the design. So I think you've got some good input on that and some good thoughts.
Thank you all.
Yeah, and just kind of closing the loop on that, I think if it is, you said it's a PCORI focused proposal, I wonder if you might game out those different options and bring it to your partners and see what they think about them and build up some justification for what you're doing based on the questions that they would like to know. I know that PCORI really cares about that. So, yeah. Okay. Russ, you're muted, but I see your mouth moving.
I apologize. I say, looking at the time, we maybe got time for one more general question that the students brought up. This has been great. And then we can kind of reassess where we're at for the rest of our time after that.
Yeah, I jotted down notes. So Russ, you're welcome to share them with the group. I think I'm going to go with the last one. I'm going to skip the stepped wedge design question. But I wrote a lot about that. I have very strong feelings about stepped wedge designs. So you all can see kind of why I think that there's been an increase and what we should do about that. But the last question that I think I'd like to touch on is why is there a need to test implementation strategies against each other in complex trials? If a study or a series of studies examines effectiveness in real world settings and adequately describes the implementation of the intervention using things like ERIC strategies, Proctor guidelines, tidier checklists, or some other standardized way, is that not adequate for the uptake by others? And the question closes with, I think I've missed something pretty critical along the way here. And I think quite the opposite. I think it's a really good question and good for us to think about, what is sufficient evidence to spur the uptake of an innovation? So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about kind of like a generalizability, transportability of evidence sort of question. So I was thinking if the effectiveness trial is implemented exactly how the program or policy would be implemented in the real world, and the real world settings and population is exactly like what you would see in the effectiveness trial, then you could make a case that that's enough to just kind of roll with what you had, and that you tested that implementation package, and that's probably good enough. But that's rarely the case, that you have that exchangeability kind of as at a one-to-one perspective. Often we're controlling still more things in an effectiveness trial as part of the research team than would be in a real world implementation study, where you're really totally hands off. So often in the work that I've seen, we need some sort of implementation focused research to understand actually what does it take to implement a program policy in usual practice or in community settings, and how can we kind of support the implementation, kind of developing the implementation strategies in a way that they'll actually work in the real world settings. Or what I was thinking about is, you may find through your initial effectiveness or implementation work that you need to modify your implementation approach. So you might learn some things that you say, okay, well, actually, we need to do this thing more, we need to do this thing less, we need to swap this thing out, to the extent that you might need to test it again. If you think about different contexts, or if a context changes, you might need a different implementation approach, which might lead to the need for another trial. Researchers are very good at making more work for themselves. We like job security. So sometimes I think we ask questions because we can, but I think that there really is a justifiable case for, not sending something out that we know mostly works, but also that, we don't really understand if this is the most efficient way to implement a program or policy in, clinical or public health settings. So I'll see if others have thoughts, but I thought this was a fantastic question. Ross, any thoughts?
I think you nailed it. Steph, again, totally optional to you here. Steph mentioned she might be able to stay on for a while. I'm sure she may have 100 other things to do too, but thank you so much. It's been phenomenal. And if you'd like to stay on, love your perspective. I'm just going to try and share, I think, 6 slides here, just to try and touch base on some other points of the readings. You had a fair number of readings, and some of them were a little dense here. And then at any point, please, Steph, you jump in. Ross, I think 1 or 2 of them are your slides. You might want to elaborate. And for the students, jump in at any time too, either chat or verbally. So if I can share my slides here, let's see. Can you see that? Okay. All righty. So this is just what we're going to do. Again, we're going to save a little time for feedback and then the upcoming assignments at the end. But here we go. So this is just paraphrasing or reiterate, I think, what Steph says. I think what matters the most about design from my perspective are these issues here. Not that there's always, as Ross said, one right design. There may actually be some wrong designs, but I don't think there's always just one answer there. But it's this notion of justifying, and particularly, rather than alternatives. And then, like we talked about with a theory or model, I think it's work through the details of your design and the implications all throughout, even if you can in the introduction and the aims. But certainly, the methods here throughout the evaluation and your analyses and things there. That's critical, again, as you show that you've thought it through, as Steph said, and use it. And often, particularly, my perspective is the more non-traditional it is, more innovative, maybe the more you need to talk about why the traditional, fallbacks won't work. I won't read all of these here, but I think coming issues that we are seeing more and maybe need even more so are ones that address context. One of my favorite ones here that I don't know if we want to take the time to deal with today or come back to, but is what's the comparator or the control that you have here, or maybe the counterfactual, depending on, some perspectives. And in particular, I always ask, what is usual care? When people say they have a usual care control, what is that? I think one of the changes that I've seen, and I think we're going to see this more, again, Steph or Ross jump in here, but as opposed to just the general linear model of the overall average outcome across all things, which has been our traditional thing, they're looking at more nuanced or more conditional factors about, what set of circumstances for what outcomes or whatever might be there. I'll pause there and see if there's anybody wants to jump in on that.
I just started putting a question in the chat, but since you paused, I'll speak.
Thank you.
So.
Go ahead and read it. I have a little trouble monitoring. Ross, that's you're going to have me help monitor.
I didn't finish it yet, so I didn't. You caught me right at the right time.
Well, just go ahead and say it.
Yeah. So this is the second time where you've made this comment about addressing context. You mentioned it earlier, is what you hope would be a future direction.
Yes.
And I feel like it's also related to what Dr. Mizuko was just describing about the importance of doing implementation trials. Are those ideas related? And what exactly do you mean by you hope that we do more to adjust context in future designs?
Thank you. Really good question. I think the way I was conceptualizing, those might be separate questions. I guess I would like to see more in a traditional sense, maybe even conceptualizing different context and finding out if different, let's say, implementation strategies might be optimal for different or could be different combinations of them for different contexts. I am a fan, and maybe not to put Elena on the spot, but might want to jump in here because I really don't know what I'm talking about. But one of the things that I'm intrigued about with configurational analysis is this notion of looking at different pathways or different combinations of factors. And I think one of those things could be looking at different context, and then there may be different other factors that work in one type of context versus another. So that's as far as I've gotten, but thanks for the question, but appreciate your reactions, others, and certainly Steph or Ross, but maybe Elena, don't feel you have to jump in here, but I know you've actually done more with configurational analysis than I have.
Well, I wouldn't say I've actually done it yet, but I've proposed doing it. And if HRQ decides to fund it, then we'll actually get to apply it. But yeah, I'm hoping to use it for exactly that question. So trying to understand what are the setting context-specific factors that facilitate active sustainment is specifically what I'm looking at.
Josh, I think one thing that is maybe just sort of obvious, but the word context it could mean a lot of things. I mean, we tend to think of multi-level context. So you might have contextual variables that affect the individual. That could be patient characteristics. You might have things that affect their family and social support networks. You might have things within a clinical setting or their work site that's organizational. So I think the starting point can also be like this overwhelming number of contextual variables that you could look at, like what are the key contextual variables that might be important for your study and for the study questions you're asking. And I don't know what the number is, but get it down to less than 10. It's sort of something that's doable, not like some of the things we've done. We did this paper where we have, I don't know, Russ, we had a list of 50 to 80 different variables, and we ended up chopping it down. But yeah, that's just overwhelming to try to collect data on all those. And so there's usually literature on that. There might be formative work you've done to identify those, and that could be a starting point. And then figuring out, does this become part of your sampling? Does it become part of how you choose a design? Does it become part of what you need to measure in the study? How does it build into the analyses you do? So, the context is important. It really is the key feature of an implementation science study, and sort of starting to narrow that down in the beginning might be helpful.
Yeah. just one other thing to that, and then I'll just say a word about this. You probably noticed I skipped ahead a few slides, but maybe the other issue I didn't articulate, but that I'm at least personally intrigued with, is changing context. And we talk a lot about that from dynamic sustainability frameworks or otherwise, but I think kind of tracking changes in context, and then are there adaptations or changes in implementation strategies related to contextual changes is another, I think, more sophisticated and kind of design issue that can get you into trouble too, as well as I think provide a whole lot of information. One of the things, again, I'll have to admit I'm biased, and I think this is an outlier, but Kemp et al., this is one of the readings you had there, have a somewhat different approach. It's not, I don't think necessarily inconsistent, but different than the classic Curran et al. Type hybrid effectiveness implementation studies. But they talk about a hybrid. It has three factors. It's somewhat from a realist perspective, but in their hybrid that they talk about is you get more combinations, but how much emphasis is there on context, understanding context, how much on different outcomes, particularly implementation outcomes, and then how much on mechanisms. Steph mentioned this before, and actually, I don't know why I put these, kind of switch these two. It's usually called CMO, context, mechanisms, outcomes. But you might look at that article. That's one too. One other thing, and again, a clear bias of mine that some of you know, and others of our program share this, is I think it's often helpful in thinking about a design or a strategy issue, especially if your goal really is generalization or whatever, to use the precise or précis to one of the models of that, and to think about this issue of pragmatism versus efficacy or explanatory across different dimensions. So rather than just saying it either is pragmatic or it's not pragmatic, efficacy thinking about how. So I'll pause there and see if any other comments, questions, reactions on anything about this slide. Okay. Let's go back. I think we were there.
Russ, I had one point on the
yeah.
third side, just
Yeah, on
very
the
quickly.
the last slide or the third one?
Slide 3 in your deck.
Oh, slide 3. Okay,
Yep.
got it.
Just noting that with the change in emphasis beyond just the average effect, note the implications for your sample size, and power analysis with that has drastic implications. So just, I think it's great to consider that. And also it takes a lot of work. So please do it and take time to do it well.
Great. So Ross, I think you might have added this next one, but the point here we've talked about before, wherever you can help with a good, concise figure, whether it's a logic model, whether it's something about your theory we've talked about, whether it's about your design. This one you might notice here talks about how your key, your usual classic triumvirate here about aim 1, aim 2, and aim 3, kind of how they fit together. This is just one example. I think we have several others in the list of 100 different things for today's course. But Ross, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on this one?
And this could be done. Yeah, I think it's just, we call it a study schema, and I think it's just really useful to, it could be done in a smaller slide than this. This isn't actually visually that wonderful. This is a little bit of a homemade job. It got funded, so I guess it's okay. But there's some, actually a grant we just wrote with Borsika Rabin. She has a graphics person who did a really nice study schema that I'll drop in, we could look at as well. But, you know, think about like just summarizing your aims and a quick view of what activities will be accomplished, what will need to be accomplished to address each aim. And then you can see across the bottom, we've got just a really rough years, 0 to 1, 2 through 5. You can build that out different ways. But I think this often gets people to just quickly, oh, I get what you're doing. there's a logical flow, there's a logical connection between the aims. And I can see in this case in bulleted language, what are the activities that the team proposes to accomplish? And so I'm sure a lot of you have different versions of this you could use, but this could be really helpful and doesn't tend to take up a lot of space in a grant.
Yeah. I just thought about the readings. You have some really nice examples too, but I'm just thinking, particularly if you have kind of an adaptive design or something, a figure that can show what happens longitudinally or whatever can really help. But a lot of reviewers still aren't that familiar with it. So some other questions. I think a lot of what we've done here is we've covered this, and I think particularly those of you that are early stage investigators, these issues are really critical. The scope, can you meet the timeline? That includes things like recruitment. A huge percentage of grants don't ever meet there or else are really, really delayed if they're recruitment goals. So I see thinking about timeline issues, thinking about retention issues there, how to maximize. And then for me, a big notion here, particularly for the future, is can you deliver on what you propose? And there may be differences of opinion on this, but I think often it's maybe best to be not quite as aggressive or maybe grandiose about what you deliver, and then to over deliver here. Some people may disagree with that, but I'll pause here, and then I think I just got 2 more slides to go over. Please push back if anybody disagrees. These are, this doesn't have to be the world according to Russ. I'm just trying to pull together some things from the readings and from Steph's great video and article here.
Russ, one really quick thing I would add. Also, especially if you're writing to the National Cancer Institute, be able to do what you're doing with a reduced budget, because the NCI is, I think it's the worst at chopping. Some of the agencies don't chop, but the NCI makes a significant chop right off the top of your budget. And then they even increment that higher in future years. So while inflation should mean you get an increase, you actually get a decrease. So be sure you build that in, find out what the funding agency does. If they take that chop off the top, you have to be able to have feasibility with the budget you'll actually get, not the budget you wrote. And so that's something I kind of learned the hard way on the first grant I did. And so just keeping that in mind.
We will talk about that at another time. That's a great point, and we'll have to listen to Ross and I whine a fair amount about that, because that can be pretty darn tough, particularly if you like have our traditional like R01 500K that's been the same since I was in graduate school, I think. So
I think, and just to give a sense of the magnitude, it's upwards of 20% my grant was cut. Like it was 18%.
Yeah.
So just think about that as you're budgeting.
And often NCI program officers can give you a sense of that. That's common. I think the big center grant Ross and I have talked about was 19%, if I recall, cut there. So we talked about that. Okay, I think I'm to the assignment, and I think I'll hold on this a little bit so we can let Steph know. But let me just kind of pause here for any other questions, things we didn't get to today.
I had a question about the overlap of classifying studies as like comparative implementation or comparative effectiveness, and then classifying them according to like the type 1, type 2, type 3 implementation and versus effectiveness, and like how you think about the overlap between those two. So if you're doing a comparative implementation trial, but you're looking at effectiveness of the intervention as an outcome, then would that be a type 2, or like how do you think about the overlap of those two different typologies?
Steph, let you take first shot at it.
This is such a common question, and I think such a tricky one. So I think about the hybrid type 1, type 2, type 3. I think people are really quick to anchor to those. But to me, that's not a study design. To me, that's like the conceptual approach by which you are answering a set of research questions and where you're putting the emphasis between effectiveness and implementation. So I think about them as separate, and I think it's okay to then say, I'm doing a comparative effectiveness trial using a cluster randomized trial or something like that, and taking a hybrid type 2 approach Curran et al. Cited. So I think it's okay to couch those differently, because if you just say I'm doing, a type 2 or a type 3 design, that doesn't actually tell you what design you're doing, or what type of research question you're actually answering. So I see them as complementary but distinct concepts. And others are welcome to disagree with me there.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could add, Elena, thank you so much for asking that, because that's exactly what I was wondering too, like how familiar are people with these type designs, and then how much should we explain them? So that's helpful to know that we should think of it more as a complement.
Apologize for my usual typos, trying to think and listen to Steph, who was saying the same thing, much more articulately than I was trying to type. I'm looking at the time here, Steph, why don't we see if you have any last words or comments for the group, whatever. We'll let you go, and then we can just quickly hit a couple logistical issues.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think just thank you for your time. And, if there are somehow things that Russ and Ross are not able to answer, I'm happy to, be in touch. And I actually get paid to help people with their work. So you don't feel like you're bothering me. I actually can chalk it up to my job. Good luck with your work. It sounds like you're all doing really interesting things, and hope to see you around the D&I circles. Okay, and I'll hop off here.
Thanks so much, Steph. That was phenomenal. We owe you another one. And myself, I'd have a little trepidation if I just said what you said, but
I know you always say that.
You might be. I hope you're not. Don't regret.
Okay,
what you just said.
I know you always say that, but I have yet to be tapped by any of your students in the past, so I feel comfortable saying it.
All right.
So, okay. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Take care. Okay. So like to do two things in the little time that's left. I'm just going to show this to you again because your assignments are due, I believe, Monday or the day before, July 3rd. And it's important that you do this. I should have mentioned at the outset, you do have these slides. So please look at this is slide 8 as you're drafting your assignment here. I won't go over them all, except for this thing is really important, is that, so Ross and I, when we evaluate it, that we have, well, obviously your name, but what's the type of proposal that you're thinking about? What's the target funder? And if you're not sure, you can put down like a couple or just no idea, don't know, and then what the target study section is. We'll just give you a lot more useful feedback if you remember to do that, not only this assignment, but every assignment. And then Ross, the other thing is, I forgot for us to talk ahead, but do we want the students to post their assignment both on Canvas and email them to us, or just to do it in Canvas? What do you think?
I think it's probably okay to just post on Canvas. I think I have a level of expertise. I can pull a document off there and give feedback. So I think that's fine. Let's try it this week. And if we have any difficulties, we might modify for the future. And then we can just like, if there's some reason we're having trouble, we'll just email the students and ask them to send to us. I don't know if this is on the slide, but we'll divide these up. So Russ will do half and I'll do half. And so we're going to switch off. I think we told you that the first week. We'll switch off so you don't get the same input from the same person every week, because we'll have different views, different biases, different ideas about what would make sense, and you can take each one with a grain of salt.
Okay, could or whoever, any of you, I was going to say Ross or Jordan, check. Andrea put in there, I had recalled the 3rd, maybe that was from last year, but take a look at, can somebody find the exact date, looking at the syllabus or the modules?
It says 5 PM on July 5th. I'm on the Canvas, but it
Okay.
also, I don't know if we already talked about this, but this slide is different than what it says on the assignment in Canvas and on the syllabus. So I just want to confirm that this slide is the right one, not the one on Canvas.
Thank you so much. Boy, my bad. That really is confusing. Okay, well, first of all, we'll go with the July 5th date for sure. So you can all spend your holiday writing your proposal, and sort of, enjoying it. But it is July 5th. I did edit this one, but it might have been, well, I quickly threw it by Ross. I think I would say go with this one, which here, and then Jordan and I will talk after we get done. We'll go together and then we will correct whatever it is there. But I think I'd prefer to go with this one. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but is there a major contradiction that anybody says?
Yeah, the difference is on the Canvas, it says just one Ames page and 10 lines of innovation. And that's what it says in the syllabus, but there's no significant section. So this one is like almost 2 pages longer.
Thank you. Okay, this one is my bad again. I thought we caught all of that with the assignment. What you saw was from last year. I'm going to change this. We actually had 4 assignments. This year we have 3, and we're adding in not just the Ames page. Last year we did the Ames page separately. And this one, we're adding in these other things. The reason is that we wanted to have you get all of these sections in your proposal. Because last year it either wasn't there or the second one was such a monster thing. We didn't do it. So we would like you to include, assuming Ross, you're still okay with this today, the modified one, include all of these sections. So it is 3 pages rather than the 1 for the Ames, and you should include these things. Ross, does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that's what we were hoping by combining these and adding one fewer assignment, be able to look at it. Sort of that front section of the grant is what we're thinking of here.
Yeah. Thank you very much for raising it though. And again, my apologies. We'll correct that hopefully by the end of today, but go with this one. This is slide 8 that's posted. This is the one that you should use and go through, and I'll see if I can put out a note. I think there might be 1 or 2 people that aren't here today too, but it definitely is all of those things. Okay, well, very quickly then, Roman, you don't have to worry about the self-evaluation. I'll correct that also. You do need to do the 2 assignments, though. The reflections are due, and then this one right here. The assignments are always due, I think, every week, noon, the day before the course, and that just helps Ross and I. Maybe we should talk about that too, in terms of process, but we thought that would be something that would help. And the reason it's due then is so we can quickly look over and try to tailor, as you saw with Steph, then to tailor based on the reactions that you're having. So I guess we're open about if that's working or not working for people.
You know, one thing we could do, given you're going to have quite a bit to do with the assignment is for the reflection for the discussion board. Don't feel like you need to write a lot, like here's what I read. And so maybe just say, this is interesting. Here's a question I have. So, you know, feel like you maybe don't have to spend quite as much time writing on that part and use the time on the assignment, if that makes sense to you, Russ.
That's perfect. Again, you do need to put something down. It's a small number, but we do look at those each week, and you do need, that's one of the course requirements, to do something. But as Ross says, again, the emphasis is on this week. And also, I think the self-evaluation was a tool that's kind of optional now. We can explain that. Don't really have time today, but that was an interactive tool we had that really is just kind of more personal for you to do that. But assignment number 1, reflections, still due, and on July 5th, and we'll fix that. Please email us, if you will, if you have any other suggestions for the rest of the course. We're not quite halfway through. But again, we want to make this something that that works for you. We're, you know, particularly I can just ramble on forever, listen to myself talk, but we want to make this something that's going to help you meet your goals or whatever. So please let us, you know, let us know what works best for you.
One tiny question.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's possible to just extend the due date for like a couple hours just after the 5 p.m. because I know that would help me out to make sure.
I think we can do that. Let's do that case by case, though. I'm trying to think if that's okay with you, Ross. Don't think I'm gonna be grading them on July 5th. Does that work okay with you, Ross, or what do you think?
Yeah, what if we just make it, I hate to say this, midnight?
Yeah.
You know, give yourself that, if you're working in the evening, hopefully you don't work till midnight, but I think that's fine.
Okay.
We can pull them off the next morning.
But just to be a bit combination, trying to recognize particularly the holiday, but being a bit of a hard ass too. That's for this time, we'll correct it. This is not a precedent that all of them, you know, you can be late on. And the reflection still should be by the noon, because that we need that in order time to process and let our guest speaker know and that sort of thing. But the assignment you can have till 11:59 on July 5th. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, gang.
Take care. See you next week.
See you next week. Thanks.
So Jordan, I will email you to try and clean this up. Brother, I don't know. I caught the other things, but I guess not this one. I'll try and look ahead to the next assignment too. But I think this was the main assignment change that we had. So my bad.
Yeah, I should have caught it too. I looked at those slides and I didn't compare the slides against the syllabus. So I'm glad they brought it up. And obviously the students are looking at the materials, which is a good thing.
Right.
I have assignment 1 open right now and I'm looking at it. I updated the instructions and requirements so far. I think I had previously caught the rubric change, the point difference.
Yeah.
But also not the instructions on there.
Okay.
So due date is updated, instructions are updated, rubric should be good. But yeah, if you find anything else or if anybody else finds anything, I can get it updated too.
Oh, thank you so much. You're phenomenal. That's great.
Yeah,
I
thanks,
will
Jordan.
try to triple check it, and then also go ahead once. I thought I did go ahead and look through, but obviously I didn't look carefully enough at things in the future after we had that. So that's on me, but thank you so much. I will look over. I'll just shoot you an email, but it sounds like you've already caught everything that we need to, but I'll particularly go ahead and look at the future assignments. So we have that. So
That's good.
all right, Jordan, we'll let you go. I think Ross and I are going to talk about some other non-course things, but
Thanks, Jordan.
so much.